Welcome back to the Insurgent Mindset. I'm Matt Tice.
And I'm Rondo Moses. This is a podcast about challenger thinking in a world shaped by disruption.
In each episode, we explore the strategies and leadership mindsets that help businesses break from the pack and stay ahead in fast-changing markets.
You'll hear conversations, case studies, and insights from leaders who are applying these mindsets to thrive in this uncertain environment.
Subscribe on our YouTube channel or follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And check out our companion blogs every week at insurgentsgroup.com for a summary of takeaways from each episode. Let's get into it, Rondo. What are we talking about today?
Well, Matt, I think given where we are in the year, it's time for our 2025 year in review.
And what a year. Lots happening this year, and certainly it hasn't been boring. But yeah, many really sort of seismic things and a few kind of meh, you know, you
Right,
know what I mean?
right,
Like it's
right.
been one of those years, sort of a bit strange.
Yeah. Well, at least, here in the US, for example, we started the year with a whole new administration. And this administration came in as more of an insurgent to the previous administration. And the question was, well, what would that look like? And I think we've seen over the last 10 months or so what this insurgent administration is up to. So we've had tariffs that created some volatility, uncertainty in the market. We had changes in federal government agencies and massive layoffs. We had a lot of different policies that were sort of outside of the norm for each administration that really, I think, created a lot of disruption for the citizenry because they weren't used to it. It's totally different than what people have been used to in the past. So I think that was the big start of the year for us, and it's carried through.
Sure. So maybe what we can do is we can break up our discussion today into a couple different components. Let's dig into that for a minute because it's interesting and it's obviously played a huge role in business, politics, virtually everything else. So I think there's some interesting things to tease out of that, and also maybe an interesting conversation about, having when is being an insurgent good versus not so good. I think that's interesting, is, for its own sake, not necessarily the right path for everybody at every time. I think it's also useful for us to reflect a little bit on, you know, a year's podcasting now, Rhonda. We're into this for 12 months.
Yes.
We've had numerous episodes. We've got some favorites, no doubt. And I think also it gives us a good kind of read on just what's happening out there and what people are worried about, what they're thinking. Kind of, I think that's really interesting. And obviously that'll set us up for next year. But I think there's also a bigger story to talk about, like reflecting a little bit on last our last episode, talking about the Time Warner sort of the battle for Time Warner. Warner Brothers, and
One Rose Discovery. Yeah.
yeah, the degree to which some of these seismic shifts in business, who is challenging, who's not challenging, and maybe have a look at some different industry sectors.
That would be
So
great.
maybe we can kind of just meander through that. But let's start with, this year, as you pointed out, we had this new administration, and I think like if we do take a challenger kind of insurgent mindset view of this, it was unsurprisingly completely different. Okay, so what we saw really across the board was, a totally, I don't want to call it fresh, but completely different approach to governing, which, had um, many of the characteristics of the insurgent, but at the same time, um, wasn't necessarily, additive in some ways. So, like, I'll just give you a couple of examples. I just had a quick look through kind of what's happening. You know, in this sort of model, we come in with a theory of better governing, which is less regulation. Kind of that's always going to be a Republican sort of thing. Um, I guess um, more selfish in some ways, or it's kind of like um, the America First sort of philosophy, um, a distrust in institutions, and fundamentally a transactional view of the world, right? So you kind of have all these different characteristics of this let's just call it the business model for governing, right? Which are fundamentally a little bit different, breaking from the pack of 70 years of, of history in terms of at least the kind of foreign and external posture of the United States. So all that sort of plays a role, but then you have to ask the question is it working? So
Right.
GDP 2024, same time last year, or annualized same time last year. Um, we're down sort of from 2.7 to lower, a little bit lower than 1.9. So I'd say we're not so much.
Right.
Um,
Right.
inflation up a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
not terribly up, and
It's
obviously
about
not.
where we started the year, 3%. It's about
Yeah,
3%. Yeah.
a little bit up, but
Yeah.
sort of not great. But that has cascaded through to other markets as well. Um,
Hmm.
Okay, so trade balance, obviously that's kind of gone in the US's favor, but not necessarily hasn't been helpful for the global economy. So that's not great. But I think that unemployment relatively flat, um,
Well, actually, no,
still quite
actually,
low.
unemployment ticked up.
Did it
It
tick
ticked up
up?
to
Okay.
it's 4.6
Yeah.
percent now,
All right,
which is
4.2 to 4.6. It's still pretty constrained. I guess that's that'll be a buffer for inflation a little bit and things like that. So look, I mean, overall, not so great. However, there are a couple things, other things sort of peeling the covers back. Insolvencies are up by about 7%.
hmm.
Deal flow started off the year pretty strong, actually finished the year pretty strong, but sagged in the middle of the year. Not great. There are some kind of little areas of worry. That's also reflected here in the Australian economy. Um, and I think, some of that private equity and, venture capital, private capital, if you will, is more tentative perhaps than it was, 12 months ago. So I guess, and then the stock market, obviously that's continued to defy gravity, and that's been interesting. So kind of a bit of a mixed bag. And I'm sorry to take up so much airtime here, Rondo, three things on my mind. Okay. One is just the utter disregard and decline of institutions from education to law to what's happened with USAID and all of the other sort of major bedrock institutions in government. That's an F plus 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 in my opinion.
Mm.
Okay, so that's one. I think that um, the second big thing on my mind is this sort of unilateral view to trade. I think what we've had is a situation, at least on average over the last 60, 70 years, where all boats rise on the tide. And what we're seeing is a theory of one boat rises on the tide and everyone else sinks. I win, you lose kind of mentality. I don't think the statistics, the data really shows that to be the case. I think a multilateral engaged world is one where everyone gets wealthier. So I'm not sure
Right.
that it's going to prove out. And I think the last thing is, just in terms of the certainty that business leaders need to be able to run their businesses, this sort of situation where we just do not have that sort of certainty that we need. Now, obviously, in the volatility, there's lots of opportunity, but at the same time, um, our clients need to run their businesses and they need to understand how to deploy capital efficiently. And that's harder than it was 12 months ago.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on that and say that a lot of the CEOs that I've talked to over the year have expressed, concerns about the uncertainty that was associated with the tariffs because there was, the um, Liberation Day in April, as they were described it, where tariffs were introduced and then they were taken off and then they were put on. And so it was the back and forth around the uncertainties made it really difficult for leaders to plan. Particular long-term planning became sort of put on hold, so it created a lot of chaos there. I just want to go back to some of the data you introduce around the economy here and say that yes, at the surface, things may look not too different from at the start of the year, but if you really talk to people on the ground, you get a totally different feeling, right? Because even though, the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.6%, there are a lot of people who have been really concerned about the job market, in particular, new college graduates, people early in their careers having a very difficult time finding employment, as well as the data showing that people are not changing jobs as much. People are holding on to jobs because they're concerned that the market is very soft. Employers are not necessarily laying off people, but they're also not hiring people. For example, the VA just announced that it is eliminating 25,000 jobs. Now, those were jobs that were open recs that weren't filled, and they're not going to be hiring new people. So it wasn't, they actually didn't say additional layoffs, but they're not, they cut out those jobs. And that's been the case throughout the economy. When you look at unemployment, even the number's 4.6%. If you look at the measure U6, which not only looks at people who are looking for jobs, but people who are working in part-time jobs but wish they had full-time jobs, that has been on a steady increase over the year.
Hmm.
So that's also a very, bad picture, and
Yeah.
not a good number. And then I think it's also just people, everyday people feeling like the prices in grocery stores continue to be high. They're not coming down. And so that's creating a lot of frustration and pain for people. And now we have, of course, the political hot cake with the hot potato with the healthcare premium. So that's expected to increase, at the end of the month, and in some cases, doubling for 20 million Americans who are on the Affordable Care Act. So I think the uncertainty around this new administration has caused some anxiety across the country. I also think in terms of the tariffs that what we've seen and heard is that a lot of businesses actually have been absorbing those tariffs and not really passing all of it along to the consumers because the expectation is that the Supreme Court will overturn it. And the international body said that the tariffs were illegal and that the Supreme Court will uphold that. So they are betting that the tariffs are going to come off. That's what I've heard. But if they find that it's not going to come off, then maybe they will start to pass more of that along to the end consumer. So it is, the lots of big changes, and I think the verdict from a lot of people, based on the polls so far, is that they feel like they're not changes that have made their lives better. So although the numbers may say the economy is not in bad shape now, for the average person on the ground, they're feeling like it is because they're hurting.
Right. Okay. So that's problematic. But you know, I guess looking at business, I think the insolvency data tells a nice story of how people, small business in particular is really feeling this. So, you triple your healthcare, these businesses are going to go under.
Cost,
So
right?
it's going to be
But even
it'll
but even in terms of businesses, customers, the time for customers to make decisions is
mm,
longer. So the
yeah.
sales cycle is a lot longer because of the uncertainty in the economy. So you have that impact as well.
Yeah, so it's sort of uncertainty coming together with sort of trust in institutions, that bedrock that we all felt is sort of very fragile now. But okay,
Uh-huh.
well, we'll see. I mean, there's obviously it's interesting because we're often or even always kind of in the mindset of the insurgent, and here we are where the insurgent is pushing, but it's sort of you have to adjust, right? So
Right.
when the market pushes back or when the institutions push back, sometimes there's a good reason for that. But
Yeah.
we'll see. I think it'll settle into a new equilibrium eventually, but whether that'll be additive or not, we'll find out. But I
Yeah.
guess now, we don't want to spend too much time on the U.S. administration. I think um, it's it's tempting because it's just been in the news and it's been so prevalent. But I think it'd be interesting now to do maybe a bit of a shift and just talk about, what's happening in the economy. And, Rondo, what are some of the big events of 2025 that kind of come to mind for you, whether it may be a challenger company sort of rising up or, some something that we learned in the podcast this year? Like, what's your top three or four things that sort of just jump out at you as, that really exemplify the insurgent mindset for 2025?
Well, one of the topics that jumps out is sort of connected to the conversation that we've been having around the Trump administration was the Tesla Elon Musk brand. How, you think about Elon Musk, as we all know, funded the Trump administration's campaign, and so he became involved in the administration early in the year, heading up the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, which was, tasked with reducing the size of government by eliminating jobs. And Elon Musk became the face of that effort. And because he was the face of that effort, there was a real big backlash against Tesla, not only in the US, but around the world. And
Mm,
when you think about Tesla sales dropped, I think they got as low as $221 a share in, I think it was the April time frame. It got so bad that, there was talk about whether the board would oust Elon Musk, but the board really, and at the same time, Elon Musk was not spending a lot of time at Tesla because he was so focused on this Doge effort that the stock was tanking all around. Lots of protests in front of Tesla dealerships. So that was an interesting story. But now, when you look at the Tesla stock now, I think the last time I looked, it was trading at $467 a share. So he went back, I think it was in May, stepped out of his government role, which was a 120-day role, went back to Tesla, focused there, and now the stock is back up. But the interesting thing is, it's not because of necessarily the EV side of the business. One of the big reasons why Tesla stock is recovering is because the Elon Musk and the company has been doing a lot more to reframe Tesla not as an EV company, but reframe it as more of a AI platform type company. So with robo taxis and autonomous vehicles, and it seems to be working. So investors are really betting on the future of Tesla and not necessarily the EV side of the business, which is getting a lot more competitive, both in terms of, GM, Ford, all those companies are. GM did very well with EVs this year. And so that side of the business is feeling a lot more competition. He's no longer the insurgent in EVs, and in EVs is more of the incumbent, getting more like an incumbent now. And so the ability to reframe is creating, I think, more of an upside opportunity for Elon Musk and Tesla. And I think that that's an interesting story from 2025, because to think about, they started the year at a high, they went to this really bad low, and now they're up. I think it's the stock is hit its peak a couple of weeks ago. So I
right.
think that's an interesting story.
I reflect on our earlier conversation at the beginning of the year about Tesla, right? Where we really talked about, in particular, the Chinese challengers like BYD coming in and
Right.
challenging. I know that Fortress USA still doesn't allow these Chinese EVs to come in and challenge, but I wonder, well, I can see it happening here in Australia where Tesla's market share is dropping like a stone. So if you were exposed to those market forces, I think you'd find that Tesla would be struggling on the EV side. But I do like the pivot, right? So in a sense of they're now into robotics and AI and other things which are, diversifying their focus, and that obviously has paid off for them. So, there was a period where I think Tesla became the incumbent, right? So they
Yeah.
they graduated. They were the incumbent. They were the leader in EVs. They got arrogant. They introduced that stupid cyber truck. It almost killed the company. They've had to pivot back, and so I think now, they sort of have moderated that a little bit and have found some other areas to play in, which may or may not pay off. We'll see. But it is interesting, sort of this sort of oscillating cycle of insurgent, incumbent, back to
Right.
insurgent, right?
And I think the point that the stock price is really being driven more by that, the expectations around this AI platform business as opposed to EV business is an important one.
Sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. I think that's a good one. I might share a couple. I think. Another thing we talked about earlier this year was DeepSeek and this sort of shift from brute power to kind of efficiency and AI. That was going to change the world overnight. As I reflect a little bit, it certainly changed, I think, changed many things, but we didn't wake up every morning feeling different. But
Right.
AI certainly has continued to accelerate. I'm not as convinced that DeepSeek has had that sort of seismic of an impact that was sort of predicted a bit earlier in the year. But it's certainly, again, for the AI incumbents like NVIDIA, AMD, and others, that did sort of force a shift in terms of how they think about AI architecture and the development of these models and so forth. So I think that played an interesting role. And I think on the AI side, the other thing that I think is really fascinating is we've now kind of graduated from what I would describe as the dabbling phase into deeply embedding AI into critical workflows in enterprises, which particularly the rise of agentic AI. We're not quite, early in the year, there was a lot of discussion about, mass unemployment, particularly white collar unemployment from the sort of rise of AI, and that really hasn't eventuated. But you can see it on the margins, and it's certainly playing a role. So I think, you can't really have a conversation about 2025 without sort of peeling the onion a little bit on AI. But there are a few things that are happening. So first, search is completely changing, right? So you have these
Hmm.
players like Perplexity, sort of the insurgent challenging Google, and more broadly, obviously, um, that's playing a key role in how companies and how consumers engage with each other. So I think
Yeah.
that's really quite seismic. It's we're going to see. I don't even know where we're up to now. Is sort of marketing 10.0 maybe, because now everyone's got to reskin all of their work. And we're talking about this in a couple of hours, but it's I think that is really profound, that shift this year in the way AI has now reached maturity in some key areas.
Yeah.
How we engage with AI is really changing.
Yeah, interesting point. And, when we were talking about the economy, in particular in the US, there are a lot of folks who speculate that the reason why the stock market is still doing well is mostly driven by AI. And
Yeah, the
that
big seven.
the big seven is so if the bubble gets burst from AI, that we would be in a recession, a pretty bad recession, that they're really carrying the market. And the interesting thing too is that the AI ecosystem is very it's a the financing for AI has been a circular financing economy. I don't know if you heard that as well. So, for example, the big four are purchasing NVIDIA chips, AI chips. NVIDIA is then taking that money and investing it into other AI startups. Those AI startups are then turning around and buying their chips from NVIDIA. And so this sort of it's a circular economy. And if the music stops, the whole thing collapses. So there's some risk in that AI, I'm going to say quote unquote bubble as well because of the way they're financing. I think I read something where the big four spent $200 billion on AI infrastructure, data centers, et cetera. They're spending a lot of money, not necessarily getting a lot of value creation from it yet, but they're investing a lot of money. NVIDIA hit $3 trillion in 2025. It peaked at $3 trillion. So these companies are getting so big and it's so insular. It makes you wonder, that this economy that we have, the value creation is not broad based. It's very narrow
Right.
in terms of what's happening.
Yeah. Another thing that jumps out at me for this year, I think in 2025, I think finally we may have reached a point where traditional linear incumbent media has finally hit the wall, right? It's sort of, I think we've had this sort of meandering kind of a little bit of fake news, a lot of digital, all this stuff has now converged this year where I think traditional media is virtually dead, particularly news media. And, kind of I think the influencers won that battle, and media to me feels almost unrecognizable from 5 years ago. And the ability, it's almost like this trust economy, um, and I think the diminishment of truth and facts is just it's so much harder to be able to get information that you can trust and understand
Mhm.
that it's grounded by some sort of reality. And I think to me, that's really profound. And I think we've had that, it's been happening for 5 years since COVID, but now, or maybe even since 2016. I don't want to circle back to the Trump administration, but this has been happening. And I think that 2025 really sort of is the inflection point to where, you know, traditional media is finally broken in my mind.
Oh
And
yeah, when you see the growth in independent media has been outrageous. I mean, you think about, for example, you had on MSNBC, you had Joyanne Reed, you had a couple other people leave, started their own independent media outlets. You have the purchasing of, I think it was CBS by Paramount.
yep,
So you have the Ellison family purchase that in a group. So it's like all this is happening, and you're seeing people say turning off the cable and the traditional media and just really focusing on independent media. And I think you're going to see more change happening in 2026 on this front.
yep, I think so. And but it is profound. It's like I think that's something that in our society, um, it's harder and harder to find an anchor to some objective fact, right? And I think for business leaders, that's difficult too, right? So in terms of,
Yeah,
if you're a business leader, on one hand, you have more information available to you than you've ever had, but on the other hand, can I trust the information that's coming to me? Is it valid? And AI plays an interesting role there too because you're not always getting the facts. So
right.
I find it difficult, and I think that many business leaders are struggling to sift through, what's real, what's not real, and it creates this extra cognitive load for senior leaders to try to make sense of the data that they're getting around them, and it's almost like a maelstrom. So I think that's a key issue. Another thing we talked about earlier in the year, Rondo, was education, and
Yes.
I think it's been an interesting year for education. We mentioned earlier in this podcast about the challenge to educational institutions, the political challenge, but I think there's equally now um, the challenge from the the student, right? So these traditional academic institutions are being eroded from the top and from the bottom as young people in particular gravitate towards more trade education, um, bite-sized credentials, micro
Right.
learning. That's all been happening again for a relatively long time. But I feel like, again, also in 2025, we've seen an inflection point there too. So, some of these changes are now really hollowing out the center of these. You don't want to be a university institution in the middle, right? Where
Right.
you're,
Right.
kind of an unbranded middle of the road university, not so good. But, I think some of the real innovation that's happening that really started a decade ago with like the Khan Academy and others, but now we're sort of reaching a point where you've got this, ecosystem of micro learning, which is creating these really sharp, bite-sized credentials that people can cobble together into highly customized and personalized learning experiences, then they could be aimed to the needs of an employer. And I think that's something that the big institutions are just not really keeping up with.
Yeah, I mean, so when you think about the MOOCs, like the mass open online courses like Coursera and some of the others, they have been growing by leaps and bounds over the past, I would say 7 to 10 years. But I think they're been perceived more as mainstream within the last 3 to 5 years. People are expecting, or and other types of certifications as young people and families start to really think about the ROI of a traditional university degree. And as the job market becomes, you know, more challenging to find jobs and well-paying jobs, people are really second guessing whether the university degree is sort of the right way for them, whether it's more important to just get some certifications and get a job. As someone who's a board member of a public school system, a charter school system, and really where our focus is on getting our students to and through college, it's a challenging environment because for us, we still believe that for our population of students, that it still makes sense. But we also always think about what's the cost ultimately that they'll have to take on to get that degree. And we do a lot behind the scenes to help them to get that. So we do believe that that model, university model, still makes sense. But with AI and all these other certifications, it does create, I would say, a pause, and people have to really think long and hard about whether they should do it or not. So universities have a lot of work to do. In addition, universities are struggling with, AI of the students using AI in class. And how do they integrate that into their curriculum? Whether they allow it or not allow it? So AI is having an impact on how the work is delivered, even within the context of these traditional institutions.
Yeah. So I think that's really reached also a big kind of change point, inflection point here in 2025. So obviously that will continue, but you're just looking for these signals in the market where the change has happened. And I think that's definitely one. Another one that
Yeah.
jumps to my mind is defense, right? So, particularly sort of the slow train wreck that's been happening in the Ukraine. I'm sorry, Ukraine. The little self-correction there. Um, sort of just the innovation on the battlefield is indicative also of some of these challenger companies like Palantir, Anduril, or others that are sort of challenging the incumbents in defense as well, which these are really nimble, dynamic companies that are seeking to um, leverage technology to apply the move fast and break things philosophy into defense really for the first time. And you're seeing that sort of happening almost in real time with this innovation on the battlefield in Ukraine, which
Yeah.
I think is really interesting. Which, again, 2025, some of these companies have reached maturity, and I suspect that we're going to see a pretty wholesale disruption of defense over the next decade, which really has only just started to take root just in this last 1 or 2 years. So I think 2025, again, watershed year for change in opening up new opportunities for disruption in defense for sure.
Yeah, and we recently talked about a big sort of insurgent incumbent battle happening in media as well. We talked about the purchase of Warner Brothers Discovery by Netflix, so the battle, I should say, for Warner Brothers Discovery by Netflix and Paramount. And we recently discussed that and what potential implications for either the streaming industry or the sort of the traditional Hollywood film industry at large as well. And I know when we last spoke, I think it was Paramount put in a hostile offer for $30 a share, although Warner Brothers had, I guess, agreed to the Netflix deal. And so they had 10 days to respond, and they've responded. And they
They
came
did.
back and basically rejected the Paramount hostile offer, saying that it would put the Warner Brothers Discovery shareholders at risk. They were concerned about the financing. So I think that that's going to be an interesting story that will continue to develop over the next couple of months to figure out weeks and months, because I think the shareholders have 20 daes now to respond. Or Paramount has 20 days to get 51% of the shares in order for the deal to go through for them or to move forward with regulatory. But I think that there's another interesting development in the business space this year that we talked about.
Yeah, it's interesting to keep watching that. And obviously the story hasn't been fully written on that, but um, I was I was surprised a little bit that the board they took that role, but it really came down to confidence in the money, right? So,
in the money.
what was that sort of loose amalgamation of capital going to be reliable in that deal? And
Right.
and already
Because there
we've
was a lot of
seen
foreign financing associated with
foreign
it.
financing,
Yeah.
Qatar this and Kushner that and whatever else. And was the Ellison backstop really real or not?
Right.
Is this a big voodoo sort of deal? Who knows, right? So I can see the board's perspective on that. It's sort of we've got certainty on one side and we've got uncertainty on the other, and obviously shareholders don't like uncertainty as we've discussed. So interesting. We'll see how that plays out, and I think. I think it is I think it is a better deal for Warner Brothers fundamentally to go in the Netflix direction, but we'll see. We'll
So
see.
Warner Brothers made the point that, you can have a good deal on paper, but then it's not a good deal if it doesn't close.
Uh,
So, so that's the key,
exactly.
right? Like, which of these
Yep.
deals do you think you can get closed?
Yep. Exactly. So
Hmm.
you're not there until you're there, are you?
Right.
Hmm.
That's right.
So a couple of things like like it was interesting also like things that we expected but or weren't expected. Um, I think climate has been interesting this year, right? So if you sort of look back on 2025, was kind of the year that I don't want to say that climate died, but certainly it's off the agenda globally, and many jurisdictions are walking back their climate promises and commitments, being led in part by the U.S. And so I thought that was really interesting, particularly. In contrast to hearing one of our favorite guests of the year, Guy Dickinson, talking about climate markets, and I thought that was
Right.
really interesting to hear his perspective in terms of how to build an effective market and how to monetize that. But it's obviously been a bit of a wobbly year on climate too, so I don't know whether it's going to recover in 2026 or whether we're going to stay at a low point for a few years. But that was an area that probably, again, an inflection point where after a sustained 20-year, compounding of climate focus, it's really,
Yes.
really fallen off.
Yeah, no, for sure here in the US, we barely hear people talking about climate these days. Certainly it's not coming out of this new administration. So,
And it isn't, let's be honest, it's not a kitchen table issue, to your earlier point, when you're struggling to pay the rent or the mortgage. Climate feels very abstract. Um,
right.
but yet still remains a significant issue to be managed. I think that's something to watch out for in 2026.
Yeah, so you mentioned Guy. I think another interesting guest that we had on this year, Rita McGrath, the professor of strategy at Columbia Business School, and just her whole notion of, leaders planning to be right as opposed to planning to learn. And I think that idea is something that I hope that our listeners really latched onto because I think it's important for, in order to be more insurgent, in order to find new opportunities, you have to plan to learn as opposed to plan to be right. I think that's a great way to drive innovation inside an organization.
I agree. That was a good one. And scripter was really interesting this year too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So hearing the perspective, particularly on DeepSeek, but getting a fresh look at AI at the beginning of the year, that was a really interesting kind of a bit quirky and
right.
fun sort of discussion. And he's continued to do great things in his YouTube sort of podcast sort of ecosystem. So I'd love to get him back on for an update at some point next year.
Yeah, and I can't forget about my Ramiro contact. Um, because Ramiro Perez at Mabe, because I think his whole focus on the international business and getting very close to the customer and really entrenching yourself in the customer to understand, how they live, and so how what they need, and then how your solutions, your products would fit into their life, or what adaptations you need to make based on the way that they would use the product, which might be different than your core market, was also a really good conversation.
Yeah, I mean, they've all been really good. I mean, we covered a lot of ground this year. We covered not-for-profits with Make It Easy, and we did a special episode on that. We spent a lot of time talking about national and firm productivity, which is really interesting. Death tech, that was fun.
Dev tech. Oh
Just to,
yeah.
get a different perspective on, something we don't think too much about, innovation in death, which, who knew that was going to be so interesting? But well, I guess I knew, but I find that really a good area. And so next year will be really fun, kind of interesting to kind of peel the onion on some of these issues. But I think fundamentally it was remarkable with all the guests that we had, how consistent the advice for business leaders was, which was, growth mindset, having an open mind, plan to learn. I really like
Hmm.
that. Take the risk. We had Randall Macon talking about solving a very discrete problem that he
Problem.
was able to scale, and just having the confidence to go out there and try that. So fundamentally, I think that on balance, I think what we can say is that this sort of notion of the insurgent mindset, how to really exist in the world of the challenger as a business leader, is definitely resonant with both our listeners, but the stories that
Hmm.
we've been hearing really, I think, bring those into relief quite powerfully.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Very good.
Awesome.
Well, 2025 is almost in the books, Rondo. So we'll have to start next year with our predictions for 2026, and we can drill down on some of these issues. I think you mentioned earlier healthcare. I'd love to spend some time really kind of unpacking that, understanding,
Yeah.
the dynamics of global health and what it means for small business in particular, dealing with rising costs, but also, some of the trade-offs between different sort of healthcare business models. I think will be really interesting to explore as a key topic.
Absolutely. So, congratulations on our first full year of the insurgent mindset and a successful 2025, and looking forward to more great things in 2026.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So let's kick off strong next year, and wishing everyone the best for Christmas, the holidays, and stay safe out there and enjoy yourselves with family and friends. You
Happy
too,
New Year.
Rhonda. All the best.
Likewise.
All right then. Cheers.
Bye.